Okay, we want to welcome everyone to our 2023 Chicago Mock UAM feasibility study. Today, we will be exploring an opportunity for smart cities called urban air mobility, or UAM. UAM is a growing trend worldwide and for good reason. With increasing pressure on cities to improve efficiency, safety, sustainability, UAM is seemingly a critical tool that fits that bill. Several feasibility studies have been conducted to assess the potential of UAM on the south side of Chicago in the past, and these studies found that UAM has the potential to provide significant benefits in terms of reducing congestion, improving mobility, reducing environmental impact, and significantly reducing response times for better patient outcomes in emergency situations. Like air, rail, and new roads in general, there's many benefits to implementing UAM for cities. Unfortunately, historically marginalized communities such as Black and Hispanic communities don't often capture these benefits due to a lack of input in the beginning, access to the projects, and/or resources related to the impending opportunity down the line. With this in mind, Vertisky takes a different approach to design vertiports and the associated infrastructure by considering underestimated areas and their residents as assets to the potential UAM deployment. If the technology is implemented in a way that prioritizes these types of communities, we believe it could potentially change the notion of an improved quality of life for the entire city at large. Our desire to conduct a UAM feasibility study comes from a client's interest in creating a drone flight facility near their office. So we employ our standard feasibility study process, which is typically about 18 months long, to identify and really address the requirements for this type of structure. As we found the structure, we decided to go a bit further and look at the full-blown service and amenities that could be provided from this location as if it were a full-blown UAM-enabled spot. So as identified in the prior studies with ACOM in the city of Chicago, University of Illinois, and the US Air Force, the common theme amongst the studies is a recommended phase approach to the implementation, starting with a pilot project to test and refine the technology, the workforce assets, and gradually expand to larger operations. This is our ethos. So with that, we thank you for joining us. And I think I speak for everyone when I say that we look forward to seeing the study's outcomes in the end. At this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about a couple of housekeeping items that we'd like to cover very quickly. If you could, keep your mics muted. Cameras are optional, and please hold questions until the end. We'd like to maintain most of the time for actual open discussion and questions. The presentation is sponsored by Vertisky Group and its partners. Our goal is to generate factual insights, not just opinion, to move the vision and other areas of the study forward. Each week or each month during these sessions, we'll present the status of the project, news, and any other updates we have, as well as the study's specific topic. This month's topic is the vision of the study, the vision. Where are we going with this? What should this look like? And towards the end, we'll do questions and answers, and then talk about the next steps that we're seeking out of this month for our committee. So right now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the stakeholders, the process, the team, and the UAM focus that is the ecosystem that makes up UAM. My name is Steve Philpott. I'm Chief Technology Officer here at Vertisky Group. So the next slide will tell us or show us all of the key components that go into defining the stakeholders. So without reading through each and every one, you have vehicles, you have infrastructure, air traffic management, regulations and standards, operations and service providers, customers, investors, researchers, academics, and communities. While the descriptions are very specific for these components, we believe that all of the stakeholders that may play a role in a UAM ecosystem fit somewhere into these areas. And so our goal is to fit those interested parties into our committees. And our committees are made up of 4 different areas. Well, they're made up of 5 different areas that connect to all of these descriptions through these 4 committees, which start with the vision, which is what we're working on today and this month to ideate and transform the area. The built environment, which in fact is the true structure and facility that we want to put there, but what is there already? What do we need to enhance? And what can we build to provide sustainability in that area? And of course, one of the most important pieces is the airspace structure that we will have to design based on the operation desired or created in the vision, and align and integrate that with existing airspace as well as existing ground traffic and activity. And then finally, we have the architectural design, which takes all of the input that we receive from the other stages throughout the committees and develops an actual representation that informs and creates the visual touch and feel of what we believe this UAM project will behold for that area on the south side of Chicago. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the process that we're using. So our goal is to take the committee input and drive forward the next step in the process. Again, I mentioned our typical process starts at about 18 months and runs a bit further. And boiling this down to 5 months required us to take some steps to influence the vision, if you will. So part of the process that we find, or that we found stakeholders or clients find most daunting, is identification of an area that would be best suited for UAM operations. And a lot of the time, we'll hear the client or the stakeholder choose a location, when in fact, we'll have to do much more due diligence to figure out which location is best. Well, we've done that. And so our goal is to take outside input through our app. It's a survey app that is issued each month with a set of questions focused on the topics. The topics are connected to the committee, each committee, and each committee can fill in the topics with additional discussion subjects based on that month's meeting. So today we're going to touch on every bit of the process, but we're not going to delve further than into the vision. We really want to build out the vision. So the current survey that's circulating for the next 30 days will bring back data points that will be presented to the committees and the committee leads for topic discussion. And we'll build that into what is ultimately the vision, which will drive the built environment, airspace, and architecture and design. The next slide, we'll talk a little bit about our focus. So the way that, now my computer is not the best in the world, so I hope it's not as fuzzy on your end. But the approach that we take at Vertisky in terms of identifying the area for urban air mobility is to reduce the area down into a manageable size for a number of reasons. One is that the flights have shorter flight paths. They also have more granular turns and lower altitudes. And they'll be landing more frequently than a traditional civil airspace or aircraft would be landing. So the first thing we did was we looked at the vertiport location to determine if it could mirror a best path created by ground transportation already. We found there was intermodal access as well as fairly close access to mass transit hub for passengers, as well as fairly close connectivity, and that's within 20 miles for last mile distribution to warehouse facilities in a concentrated area in Chicago. After we determined where the vertiport would be located, and essentially it also had to be at least 5 miles from the nearest airport, and if you look to the left, that's Chicago Midway Airport. We also had to line up the placement of the vertiport so that it didn't interfere with the approach to Midway's runways. And these are things that we would also figure out in our feasibility study, we just did in advance. So in just placing the ground space or identifying the ground space, we had to align the vertiport so that we could, one, not interfere with the existing routes, two, be able to elevate or come to an altitude without impeding traffic from nearby heliports for the nearby hospital. And we also needed to determine actual routes that can be identified by air traffic control, as well as the operators of these aircraft. So in reducing the airspace down, we also built out a 3 square mile area. So where the dot is the vertiport, that larger blue circle is a 3 square mile represented by a circle, because this is me. It's a 3 square mile area in which we will enable the airspace routes, the air traffic management data, as well as surveillance of airspace just over that particular sector. So we've looked at the vertiport placement, the vertiport benefits, the vertiport chances for impeding traffic. We've looked at the airspace design, or we're seeking to design out actual routes that would harmoniously fit in with that airspace. And we want to consider the much wider or broader civil airspace in which traditional aviation is operating, because while we have one vertiport in mind, we'll be traveling to at least one other vertiport, and we'll have to enter and exit that type of airspace.
Hey, Stephen,
Yes.
are you taking questions now, or do you want us to wait?
Could you wait to just a little bit if you
Sure.
could remember it, Ken?
Okay.
Yeah, just for time and kind of syncing up on what we're trying to pass on. Sandra, could you go to the next one? Thanks. So Evertisky is in fact a holding company made up of companies that represent various capabilities and skill sets across UAM. In fact, most of us come from other walks of life that are just considered edge innovation. And so using our broad approach to the application of innovation to today's needs, we have a team of really sharp folks to lead us forward. We have Mr. Giuseppe Carusi, who's joining us from Rome today. He's our chief visionary or visioneer and chairman. Sandra Formenton, she's our fearless leader and CEO. Myself, the CTO, Felix Lee, who is our chief commercialization officer, who focuses on R&D opportunities that we can turn into products and materials and services for our customers. And our superstar head of architecture and design, Mr. Giancarlo Zima. Felix and Giancarlo could not be with us today. However, their capabilities will be shown as we present the rest of the study. Right now, I'd like to turn it over to our chairman to talk a little bit about what the industry is in terms of what people believe and how we kind of pair our vision. So I want to turn this over to Giuseppe, please.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Stephen and Sandra. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Giuseppe Carusi, and I am the chairman at Evertisky. In this section, we'll be considering the feasibility study outcomes, which are resumed in the next 4 points. So basically, we're going to consider UAM impact for sector, commercial operations and infrastructure, a proposed UAM implementation, and a strategic and economic stakeholders' advantages. For the first part, talking about UAM impact for sector, Evertisky's standard UAM feasibility study consists in a digital structure developed as developed as a part of the study. It can be used to simulate UAM activities, including the deployment of optimal flight corridors and efficient vertiport operations. It can also be used to design and create world-class customized experiences that are expected from UAM. The commercial operation and infrastructure means that UAM requires specialized infrastructure, such as vertiports, charging stations, and integrated urban airspace structures to maintain the airspace safe, and which can be integrated with existing transportation infrastructure to increase accessibility and convenience for passengers and freights. Moving on to the commercial operation and infrastructure of UAM, it's essential to consider the profile of UAM vehicles and the infrastructure required for their operation. These vehicles require specialized infrastructure, such as vertiports, charging stations, and maintenance hubs. Furthermore, UAM vehicles could reduce the need for traditional helicopter operations, which can be noisy and result disruptive to urban residents and to businesses as well. So to leave behind in this feasibility study refers to the digital model and structure that have been developed, which can be used by stakeholders and decision makers to better understand the potential benefits and challenges of UAM. The UAM feasibility study is crucial for assessing the potential impact of UAM on various aspects of society. Evaluating the feasibility of implementing UAM in a particular location and informing decisions about how UAM can be designed and operated to maximize benefits. The UAM feasibility study can help to ensure that UAM is implemented in a way that benefits the society as a whole. So UAM can actually reduce traffic congestion, as Stephen mentioned before, and travel time in urban areas, as it can bypass ground level obstacles and take efficient routes to destinations. This results in time saving and consequential increase in productivity. Additionally, UAM uses electric power, reducing the carbon footprint of transportation and noise pollution compared to traditional ground transportation and helicopter operations. Overall, UAM has the potential to revolutionize transportation in urban areas, but of course, careful planning and investment are required for this. So thank you, and I'll give the word back to Stephen.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Let's talk a little bit about the current industry position. And we'll touch on our partners a bit. Excuse me. Okay, so real quick, a lot of the considerations for vertiport design, development, placement are not, there are no standards for it yet. In fact, there are just guidelines that have been presented by EASA, the European version of the FAA, and the FAA themselves. Some of the things that have been recommended were taken into account. One of the most important things is the fact that vertiports should not be placed on airports. That's the oddest thing in the world that most people think anyway. Vertiports should be in an airport. However, the integration of the scheduling as well as providing skirt space for parking and traversing to depart and approach would add more than 15% workload to an air traffic controller's daily labor, which is not acceptable when in fact the Dallas-Fort Worth NASA pilot last year found that any increase in ATC workload by more than 5% was completely unacceptable. So the current approaches to placing vertiports in airports is off the table. The second one is building a vertiport that's more than 14 inches off the ground. The guidance on that is out completely. So building vertiports on top of buildings and parking structures, it's kind of at the risk of the stakeholder right now. There's no real guidance on it. The other thing is airspace structures. The current approach to air traffic management for UAM considers retrofitting the existing traditional airspace environment. So where the national airspace consumes or at least publishes information and communicates data using ground-based or satellite-based systems, either in their wide area augmentation systems or some of the other digital systems that they use. These refer specifically to the airspace above UAM. It does not consider 400 feet to the ground. In fact, there are a number of gaps that we'll cover when we get to the airspace structure session in a couple of months from now that'll talk a bit about the gaps in the current infrastructure and the approach we're taking with NASA to fill that gap. Finally, there's the flight corridor. A lot of the design for commercial operation for drones as well as air taxis seems to be based on a scattered approach where a vehicle will take off from point A and find their best path to point B. And we found with our work with a couple of different airlines as well as the industry that the flight corridors are best serving the operators and the safety of the airspace if we mirror the same trajectory-based operation that we do today. Further, there are no rules of the road, if you will, for operators to follow. So we'll take the impending operation and apply the ground rules to construct flight corridors. And all that's saying is that down main corridors, there will be a ground traffic layer, and there will be an air traffic layer following almost those same routes, just for management and rules sake. We are partners or members of a number of different associations around the world, partly for knowledge sharing amongst peers, and the other main reason is to be engaged in actual UAM projects, such as the one with FOCA in Switzerland, to determine the best method of implementing what's called a U-Space project there. And our work with NASA is focused on the ATMX, UTM working groups across cross-cutting community integration and aircraft operation. So now I want to turn it over to our super fearless CEO, who's been instrumental in not only pulling together the partnerships that make Evertisky work, but in finding a number of strategies and tools to allow us to really get into really important conversations with stakeholders around the world and craft out projects to bring UAM to their institutions. Sandra?
Thank you very much, Steve. Okay, let's start with this study methodology first, but then we are going to move to the study approach. We are going to focus on a vision and the scope of this phase specifically. And then we're going to talk about how we are going to implement your vision. So let's start with the study methodology. So the UAM feasibility study methodology involves a participatory study approach, which involves online data gathering from our members, you, and the general public. This approach aims to gather a wide range of perspectives and input to ensure that the study is comprehensive and representative of various interests. Then the data gathered will be analyzed. And once the data have been redefined, the study team will release the findings and recommendations. So this approach ensures that all relevant parties are involved in the study process and that the recommendations are based on a comprehensive understanding of the issues and concerns related to the UAM implementation for the selected location. When it comes to the study approach, as Giuseppe mentioned earlier, our UAM feasibility study is a digital representation of a potential UAM-enabled community based on your vision, community sentiment, upgrade to the built environment, and eco-friendly architecture. So let's give a look to each one just to give a deeper understanding of this. The first phase is dedicated to creating a formal template for the development of the project, while a second phase focuses on public perception of complex projects like this one. And the public perceptions is really, really important during this process. The third phase is based on insights from the vision and the community perception of the project. And the fourth phase ensures that the sites are suitable in operational and regulatory frameworks, and as well as it focuses on developing long-term policies to replicate the best practices for project success. And finally, we have the final phase, which is a soft launch, and is meant to create a visual blueprint of vertiports and eVTOLs drone flights, as well as customer experience. So for this month, we are focusing on the vision phase. So let's give a look to the scope of this phase. The scope for this first phase of the UAM feasibility study is to identify potential use cases for the UAM and integrate UAM with existing transportation networks and regulatory frameworks. Also, it involves assessing the impact of UAM with a visual landscape of this specific location that we selected and identify UAM infrastructures. That means also provide necessary facilities and services and also assess the feasibility of FATOs. So for the general public, the FATO is a final approach and takeoff area. And additionally to these elements and meant to develop further our scope, the study will also evaluate the feasibility of using different types of aircraft for UAM operation, assessing also their performance, safety, and environmental impact. So our goal now is to enable your vision. So firstly, we start enabling UAM in the selected location, which is 6200 State Street in Chicago, Illinois. And we are going to enable UAM and its potential through your vision that could prioritize connectivity, urban transit, and businesses, while also addressing the potential benefit of UAM for the community. And such as also, we already know it, but it's really important that it has a positive impact when it comes to the environment, reducing the traffic congestion and increasing mobility. So by keeping these advantages in mind, you will also set the path for incorporating robust safety for both, which is passenger and the general public. So your vision for UAM will also provide insights on sustainability and accessibility measures for all users, so that the UAM location can be designed and operated in a way that benefits both residents and businesses, while maximizing the positive impact on the environment. And I keep enhancing this aspect. In terms of maximizing connectivity and businesses, your vision for UAM will contribute to integrate UAM services with local businesses, commercial, public areas, and existing transport and distribution system. I'm going to hand it over to Steve.
I'm back. So let's talk about the actual study. Take the prop forward there. We're good. There we go. Okay, good. Okay, so for those who don't know the south side of Chicago, it's almost mirrored and characteristic by every other neighborhood that's within 10 miles of a major airport. There's about 700,000 people who live there. Most have access to the rail transportation. The rail transportation has gotten kind of iffy in terms of reliability. The other intermodal transportation issues have begun to boil up, with the train companies now partnering and increasing their ground traffic, which now impedes emergency vehicles and just back and forth consumer traffic. And there's also the characteristic of traffic congestion, pollution, things like that we need to take care of. So in looking at this area, we know that we have two things that are absolutely necessary for UAM to work out. One is population density. We've got 700,000 people. We've got about 20,000 people per square mile. So it's very dense. And then you're about 8 miles from the major airport. And this location for the vertiport is in fact about 5 miles from downtown Chicago. Nearby rail lines for both mass transit and regional transit are within a minute away. And then a mile away, there's another mass transit line. So the location that you see in the little circle there that Sandra was talking about on 62nd and State Street in Chicago is about 3/4 of a football field in terms of the size. The area that I mentioned that will be enabled will be 3 square miles. So in considering the vision during the study, we're talking about what happens in that circle, the operation, whether there's retail, whether there's signage, how people get in and out, the best areas, and a number of other factors for that particular location. And then we're talking about the broader enabled 3 square mile sector. So in most cases, I would guess that vehicles or the VTOL aircraft will not land within those sectors. However, commercial drone activity will occur for certain. When we're done, we know there's going to be opportunities to deploy commercial drones. We'll spec those out. Most of them will land in that 3 square mile area. So there's a lot of effort that we have to put in once we get the vision for the operations to define those flight lanes for that particular area. And at the end of the day, these are our 2 areas of focus. You've got the airspace overhead, you've got the ground space beneath, and you've got the wider swath of enabled area that has to be considered. In those areas, 3 square mile areas, we designate as UAM sectors, no different than a functional airspace block. It's just for UAM. Next slide. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so we're going to enable all these good things, and we want people to think about just give their perspectives, their high-level perspectives of what commercialization could look like in an area. There are questions about workforce. When I spoke of a client that wanted us to build a drone training facility, that client is the Chicago Urban League, and we developed their UAM and their professional drone training programs. And it became large enough where they are acquiring their own fleet and they're looking for an area. But during our work with them, we introduced them to Eve Air Mobility, Archer, and some other folks in the industry who talked about the need to start looking at workforce development so that they can truly operate. Because right now, you know, if you're just running one prototype aircraft, the staffing's there. But when you start to run 2, 3, 4, 5, you have to understand what the staffing is going to be and where you're going to get that workforce. So we are developing a national program with the Urban League groups to identify the workforce piece. The airspace construction is our bread and butter, and we would like people to think about if they're going to fly from that location, where would they fly to? Or if they're going to fly from a location, when would they fly to this location? Are you going to fly to this location so you can go to the football game, which is much closer than if you drove from Schaumburg? Or are you going to fly from this location because you're flying from school? I'm sorry, yeah, you're leaving school and you're flying to your home in the suburbs. Also, the architecture of the vertiport, the look and feel of it is really going to be dictated by the architect themselves based on the vision. But at the end of the day, the input on what this thing should look like has to come from the public. It truly has to come from the public. Should it mirror the greenery and natural state of the area around there? Are there additional extensions from that vertiport ground space that can enhance the area? Are there places on the ground that are going to be automatically connected to the overhead civil airspace? These are all things we want people to think about, give us input on, so we can craft those data points, and the committee can help determine that vision. Next slide, please. And then we'll go back to Sandra Formenton to talk about some other stuff.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, so we are going to talk about the opportunity, the activity required, and the change. And then we're going to give a little bit of information when it comes to define the vision for ground and space operation, and define airspace over enabled areas. So when it comes to the opportunity for this specific location, 6200 State Street in Chicago, Illinois, I know we have some audience all over the world, so that's why I'm specifying where we are. So this location presents a unique opportunity for urban air mobility implementation with potential of flight corridors and integrated digital urban airspace structure and vertiport infrastructure. So the UAM infrastructure can be integrated with the existing transportation infrastructure, providing a seamless connection between UAM and other modes of transportation. I'm going to reiterate what Steve just mentioned a few slides earlier. There has to be point A and point B. Additionally, strategic and economic advantages of UAM for stakeholders in the transportation sector include also a competitive advantage for companies that operate in congested urban areas. Chicago is one of the most, probably the first one in the world congested area in city that we actually know. And this will also contribute to reducing delivery times and increasing efficiency and new business opportunities for companies involved in the development of maintenance and UAM infrastructure. So let's give a look what actually that will mean when we talk about changes and activity required. So the infrastructure required for UAM operations poses a significant challenge, and it is essential to assess the strength, the weaknesses of a proposed UAM implementation in this location. So deploying UAM will require a change of an activity requirements, including infrastructure development, regulatory framework, skilled workforce development, and ongoing technology development. So let's give a deeper look what that actually means. So when it comes to infrastructure development, to support UAM, new infrastructure will be needed to be developed. So that includes vertiports, charging stations, integrated urban airspace structures to feed airspace management systems. And all these elements require significant planning and coordination with local authorities and other stakeholders. When it comes to the regulatory framework for UAM is still in development, and new rules and regulation will need to be put in place to ensure safe and efficient operation for UAM vehicles. When it comes to skilled workforce, and thank you, Steve, for mentioning Urban League, the development and operation of UAM infrastructure will require workforce with expertise in areas such as UAS pilots, engineers, maintenance, and much more. And ongoing technology development and innovation, it is essential for the success of this project and UAM as a whole. So ground and urban airspace clearance are essential for safe operation of eVTOLs and drones. And it involves identifying and analyzing the physical and operational constraints in the airspace, such as buildings, power lines, and other obstacles that may pose a threat to eVTOLs. And this information is then used to create a clear and safe airspace for eVTOL and drone operation. This also involves evaluating the sustainability of the land for eVTOL operation, including the vertiport and the functional requirements and specification of these facilities. So each element must be carefully developed to ensure that they are suitable for eVTOL operation, amendable to customer demand, and meet all safety and regulatory requirements. So when I say define the vision for ground space and operation, it is really important that we carefully design the ground and urban airspace. That means developing predictable corridors through software-defined systems and ensuring that the land analysis and specification align the airspace. So municipalities and stakeholders can support a safe and efficient deployment of eVTOLs and drones within cities, communities, and in this location. So in terms of broader sectors, so one key aspect of the feasibility study is the definition of airspace over which eVTOLs and drones will operate. So this airspace definition will include the altitudinal boundary within which eVTOLs and drones will operate, as well as the sector size within which aircraft will be allowed to fly. So defining the airspace over which eVTOLs can operate is crucial for ensuring safe and efficient UAM operation. And the altitudinal boundary of 400 feet to 0 feet will allow aircraft to fly at low level altitude, providing a quick and efficient transport in urban areas without interfering with traditional airspace used by commercial airlines. So per our standard, the sector size, as Steve mentioned earlier, is 3 square miles, and this will provide optimal space for UAM vehicles to maneuver while still ensuring adequate airspace separation to prevent collisions. Thank you, Steve. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hey, can you go back one slide or two slides? Maybe? I'm going to try to point out something. I don't know if I can. Okay, so this is in fact the block of both airspace and ground space. And so the middle block is where the vertiport would sit. The area in front, just in front of that line, is a main vein. In fact, this street that runs from left to right in front of those freight car, or I guess they're real truck cars, runs directly into Midway Airport. It's directly 8 miles from there. And then just further to the left, right by the corner of the last box here, is the entryway into the mass transit station that takes you 5 miles downtown and another, I believe, 4 miles south to the end of the line. And then to the left is about a mile, not even a full mile, is the other transportation hub, which also goes to downtown Chicago and as far as the suburbs too. There are 2 rail lines that cross over here, and this is Norfolk Southern. And anyone in Chicago knows the issues we're having with Norfolk Southern. And their goal is to develop out this entire corridor, starting with the train at the bottom, going all the way past our box to the edge of our boundary, our northern boundary, and then another 3 miles west toward the airport. So there's an opportunity to collaborate with the railroad in the future to truly develop this out if this area is one that's selected. And then finally, the middle box that is depicted here over the vertiport, to the left and to the right on the ground are main arteries. They're main streets. While there is an expressway, which I didn't mention, to the left of this box, these 2 lanes just on the outside of the middle box are main veins that run right into downtown Chicago. They're just weird, wide streets that no one really uses. So these could be alternate entryways and thoroughfares to reduce traffic in and out of the vertiport too. So these are just things to think about when crafting the vision. So you can go forward, Sam. Please. Okay, let's go to our standard model real quick. Okay, so we touched on a little bit earlier. So we're just looking for stakeholders to have brainstorming discussions and give us those high-level concepts so that we can incorporate them into the vision. Beyond the vision, there will be no additional elements added to this study's scope, just to adhere to time constraints as well as the study's broad spectrum of information that we have to pull in anyway. So that's the standard model. High-level concepts, brainstorming out of the committees, and no additional brain power put on after we get the vision in terms of what this thing should look like. Next, please. Finally, just to reiterate, your flight sector to be considered is 3 square miles from that vertiport location we talked about on 62nd and State Street. The vertiport sits on the northeast corner of that sector. The vertiport itself is made to operate on a 12-hour schedule that comes into play in terms of egress, access, security, and a number of other things. But the airspace over the vertiport will be open 24 hours a day. So if there's another sector added, in theory, a commercial drone could use that airspace to traverse to their point B. The distance, we're looking at a radius of about 30 miles from the vertiport. Any place that's within 30 miles could be a destination location. Any place within 30 miles. However, there will be no flights to an airport's tarmac. So to answer a question that I got earlier, if you can't fly to a tarmac, to the airport tarmac, what's the benefit of taking an air taxi to an airport? That's what we need to discover. If there are locations near the airport that seem to be vacant or abandoned, or just a good place to land, we will look at it as a potential point B, point C in the ecosystem, which will be UAM. Because we have to develop point A in all the airspace, but we also have to identify points B and on. The last thing is that we took a snapshot of what should be the best location and determined it was the best location. We don't have access rights to build there. We don't have permitting. We don't have any of that good stuff. This is a speculative approach to taking the participation of everyone who wants to be involved and develop this out. But at the end of the day, if the city of Chicago wanted to take the study and activate it, they would still have to do a land abatement and electronification study to make sure that the area is really worthwhile when we go through that process with them. Next slide, Sandra. I think we're just going to go into we did that, the soft launch. I can just go into the soft launch again real quick. So after everything is said and done, what we're going to hand the world is a document that spells out the answers to a number of questions that make up the actual vision. The soft launch, like Sandra said, is a digital representation. So what the city of Chicago could have is a digital representation of that airspace and that ground space and that vertiport in operation with selected UAM vehicles that are plugged in as the objects within that. They will have a 4-dimensional representation of that area to show all of the activities, assets required, amenities, potential services, architecture, and everything else. At the end of the day, our goal is to allow cities that use this model to just flip a switch on the simulation and activate their infrastructure. And that comes into play when we talk about airspace structures in our 3rd meeting, I believe it is. Okay, we can move forward, Sam. Okay, so at the end of the day, the committee should look for in this or for the next meeting, elements to give us a go-to-market vision of the selected land that we picked out. We want to develop the vertiport requirements based on the vision that's been given to us by residents and industry and transportation professionals and urban planners and all the other good folks. We want to determine the airspace structure needs. What are the routes? What are additional requirements that we need when you think about the hospitals nearby or the flights, part of the flight line for search and rescue passes within a mile from there? What else do we need to build out the airspace structure to be safe and efficient and effective for the city and for the industry and aviation as a whole? Next slide, please. All right. So the current survey that is in the ether is focused on gathering the data that we need to build out each of these elements here. So there are, and someone said to me the other day, there are 26 questions. We have to answer 26 questions. And I had to tell them, would you answer 26 questions if you could change someone's life for the better? So they took the survey. So anyway, this survey will be in circulation through next month. And we will provide the outcomes and infographics for discussion amongst the committees. We would like to, at that time, select committee heads. We have folks from the architecture side and construction side, as well as airspace structure side, who are interested in heading committees. And so we'll make that determination next month, and based on some of the other input that we'll get throughout the month too. So that's where we are today. We want to develop that vision that at the end of the day will really enable UAM to bring the benefits and all the other good stuff that's been touted to these cities. We do know that there are aircraft certifications to be had, there are additional regulations to be developed, but cities are in terms of their vision for UAM, they are considerably behind. And while the FAA says that residents are the #1 element that can stop a UAM project, most cities have not had a discussion with residents as to what the benefits are because they believe it's so futuristic, while the industry understands this is just a process of getting to market, and we are in that process. So as we think about these things, as a whole, as participants, think of them in terms of enablement and not in terms of futuristic potential. If we can enable it, it will work. And we are coming together with other parts of the ecosystem that are starting to work to provide this as a benefit.